Hello, how are you, Catherine? Thank you very much for accepting this conversation with CITLA, the Center of Innovation in Latin America. Please, can you tell us who you are?
City. I live outside of the city, and I've been your colleague and friend happily now for almost 16 years. And it's a pleasure to have shared my professional development and personal development with you, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you so much. As you know, Latin American and obviously where you are, we experience a health crisis. And can you tell us what it means to you, this health crisis?
The COVID-19 crisis has impacted every aspect of living here. It's impacted every aspect of our professional lives. New York City was the epicenter, and the Mount Sinai health system was at the epicenter of the epicenter, the original one in the United States. And we had very little time to prepare. From the second we found out about it as a health system, in very late February. Our first case was on March 1. And then within about, it was not even quite 2 weeks, we were headed into lockdown. And so it was a very rapid transformation, both in terms of, the entire area, which, there are millions of people that live in the area, 15 million people in the greater New York metro region. And to go from commuting every single day into the city, millions of people back and forth, and seeing, thousands of patients a day in our health system, to then all of a sudden, all of us at home, but yet care needing to go on, and then very, very rapidly, hundreds of very sick patients in our hospitals. It took a lot of agility, and our dean at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, Dean Charney, part of his research is on resilience. And one of the things that we've had to really focus on is the short-term sort of emergency resilience in our, emotionally, but also professionally. It's a 38,000 person health system. We are, I believe, the 22nd largest employer in the entire New York State. And so to have that many people, that many employees have to very quickly adapt to a crisis situation for the organization, as well as managing the crisis within our own families and the communities that we live in. It took a lot of agility and a lot of resilience, and we made it through. And yes, there were something along the order of within a 25-mile distance from where I live, and really a 50-mile radius from New York City. 50,000 people died in Long Island, New York City, Connecticut, northern New Jersey, and also in the greater New York area north of New York City. And so, I can't emphasize the fact that it took a lot of adapting and a lot of flexibility. And, I can talk a little bit if you'd like, whatever you want to talk about, lead the conversation, please. But I can talk a little bit about our hospital response regarding informatics and some of the things we needed to do.
Oh, for sure. That's exactly what we need to, and that's very good Spanish approach. The good thing, we leave it to the last. It's like a good meal. Therefore, as you showed me many times, Catherine, and I want to do it publicly, then you are a scientist who really inspired me to basically not only finish my PhD, but to inspire millions of people. Then science can save people's life. And today we're here with a COVID-19 who actually have proven that scientists, we've been saying these decades and decades, how important it is to put a person first and profit later. Therefore, before you give us all the response, which I've been following up your work, I know you're very committed. What would you say to people in Latin America and in Chile, especially, why science is so important to our lives?
Science is so important because it's a systematic approach. It's a way to sort through, what are hopes, what are fears, what are emotions, versus, what are data and what are facts. And even if we don't have all of the data and the facts to know for sure a situation, data and facts lead to a preponderance of evidence. And they guide decisions. And when you're in, healthcare, certainly when you're in a crisis, you want the best evidence possible for decision making. So you take the best data you can get, you take the best evidence you can get, and you make the best decisions you can, and sometimes very rapidly. It doesn't mean that perhaps that as more evidence and data come in, the picture may shift, and that's what science is. It's not a set of never-changing facts written in stone. It's a picture that builds over time, and it's a framework. And so you have to continue to accumulate facts and continue to refine your methods for essentially sifting through them to find, to get as close as possible to the truth. What is reality, to help guide your decisions? And that's why it's so incredibly important. I've been to Chile 3 times. I love the people there. I love the culture. And as we've talked about, in some ways it reminds me in the very best of ways when I was growing up in, the United States as a young girl. Very much of our culture there. We have so much more in common than I think many Chileans might think. And at the same time, I do also know that despite much sophistication culturally and much sophistication with technology in the country, there's a bit of a lag in terms of some of the understanding of the systematic thinking and the training for scientific method, and to use data and evidence as a framework for making decisions. And so I so encourage increasing understanding.
Therefore, that's exactly right. Therefore, how do you explain, I got a beautiful girl called Matilda. And you know very well the curiosity she got, and especially now with the crisis, you need to keep entertaining these children at home. How do I explain to a child like that what is a scientific method? Because even at school, they talk about science like it was Einstein, Newton, or a great, for us, Florence Nightingale. But it's so far away. They said, this is the past. But what is mean scientific method for the future?
At its foundation, it's taking measurements. What can you measure? And how can you measure something in a way that is, it's non-biased, as non-biased as you can be. And so it's taking measurements and it's collecting more data. So for instance, if you are testing the number of COVID cases you have, if you test widely enough, you have an understanding of not just in one community or one pod of people how many people have it, but you can begin to build models that estimate in the entire population what is the real prevalence of cases. And there are ways to do that. And at the heart of it, without getting any more complicated than that, it's about measuring, and it means testing. And to do testing, you have to develop tests that are both sensitive and specific. So tests that are accurate as possible to test for COVID, the virus. And at the same time, that's also very important because one of the ways that we measure risk, we're always in healthcare and in science, we always have to weigh risks. Life is not without risks. There's no such thing as not having any risks. But in healthcare in particular, we're trying to mitigate risk and we're trying to manage it and we're trying to have as much quality of life as possible. And so when you have a pandemic, it's incredibly important to have that population estimate of the case numbers, because then when you start to see, the numbers of people who get very, very ill with it, and you start to see the numbers of people who very sadly are dying from this, then you can estimate, exactly, the severity of this particular pandemic, and how many people are dying out of the total population that have it. and how many people are becoming very ill, perhaps debilitated for long periods of time. And that helps you determine risk. And the level of risk then also, importantly, it's not just to measure for measuring's sake, it's that determines as a society, how many resources do you funnel towards something and how fast? It determines policy. It determines action. And that's key because actions save lives. And so that's why this idea of measuring and testing and doing it in a systematic, scientific way is so important.
Wonderful, darling. I just going to give a little short summary of your beautiful speech in Spanish because my translator is getting ready.
Okay.
Therefore, as you know, you heard me many times I speak Spanish. I speak English, but it's a third language, which I said is the street language.
Okay.
Just for comedy, really. Therefore, doctora Caterina Craven dijo una introducción que venía de Estados Unidos y que estaba muy contenta de compartir con nosotros y que nos explicó que en New York, sobre todo que trabajaba en un hospital, donde Cano trabajaba de resiliencia, de adaptarse en una crisis y nos habló últimamente, estos últimos minutos, acerca de la calidad de vida y por qué ciencia es tan importante y el método. El riesgo más importante es medirlo y comprobarlo. Medir el riesgo no solamente impacta a la sociedad, pero también la policy, la política pública. ¿Por qué? Porque eso requiere acción para salvar vidas. Ese es el resumen de los primeros 10 minutos. Tome atención y aprenda inglés. Thank you, darling. I just give a summary of your key points in a few seconds because I want to prove here that it's a big gap within science in English and science in Spanish. As you can see around the world, we have proven all our publications in English, but we leave behind a little bit when they're not doing science, they're not investing in science. Therefore, the copying and paste, what is the risk, as you very well mentioned, to copy and paste a scientific finding that you actually proven, and it happened with a few technology, I proven in France, and then I want to implement it in south of Chile where I got ethnic groups. What the scientific method do to us to adapt this?
Well, you have to take into account, the actual people that you're attempting to apply whatever policy or action it is, and then kind of backing up from there, whatever science that you want to do. You have to understand that people are different. They're different at to some degree. We're more common than we are not. But to some degree, there can be genetic differences. There certainly are lifestyle differences. There are climate differences. There are what we can call social determinants of health, which are very different. Certainly within Chile, there are many, many different communities, much less if you take from the south of Chile to, say, Paris in France. These are very different places in terms of lifestyle, in terms of pollution level, in terms of population density level, in terms of the type of houses, in terms of whether the extended family lives together or not, diet, access to fresh food, access to health care, whether or not people smoke or not, smoke cigarettes, cigars, how much fat, meat fat they have in their diets. How much plant-based food is in their diet, how much they drink. These things vary very much with any different population group, even within the same country, much less from one country to the next. And so when you are doing a study, depending on the kind of science you're doing, you absolutely need to consider the population that you're studying first and foremost. And then, certainly some methods are going to be the same no matter what population you're looking at. But the factors that you measure, the kinds of things that you need to take into account, that may change. And also, there are certain differences physiologically between men and women. And so often men have been overrepresented in scientific studies, particularly in healthcare. And viva la différence,
Fantástico.
We change differently as we age, and we react differently to pollutants in the environment. We react differently to sustained alcohol drinking over time. And so all of these things are things that the scientific method takes into account, that science takes into account. And so, yes, when there's a strong study in France or Germany or the United States or Australia, it may be worth trying to recreate it in certain populations in Chile or in other countries. But very much we have to take a look at what were the questions they were asking to begin with, and do those questions apply in Chile? And if they do apply, how does the population differ? And if so, what factors do we need to adjust for, and how do we measure that? And all of these things, the scientific framework, it can sound overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Well, yes, yes, it is. But there are methods and ways to start to understand how you sort through this. And every person that works in science in any capacity starts to understand and learn the methods. And you don't just do this all by yourself. You have team members.
Correct.
People have expertise, and they help each other think through the processes of starting from what is the big question we want to ask, narrowing down to, well, who do we want to study, and why? Why are we asking these big questions, and does that make sense? And then from there, you figure out what are the best methods that we need to use. And then you start to get into, well, how are we going to fund this, and who's going to carry it out? But it's a method. It's not just something you have to go off and figure out and recreate entirely yourself. You start, first things first, we all put our shoes on, right? One shoe at a time.
That's right. And also I learned over the years, and since you're a very good reader and you read books of many kinds, and I learned from you the power of reading, the method scientifically requires some maturity as well, and that requires time. Sometimes, as you very well said, I mean, it's such a it's like honey to my soul listening to you, because sometimes as a scientist you are very alone, because you say, well, this is not the right question the government is saying, it's not the right answer. They're not taking the time. They're saying this treatment works, but it doesn't work for another population. How can you tell that just taking lemon will cure cancer? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, because the right question, it needs some thinking. And sometimes in business, it's not time to think. Therefore, what is the difference between a scientific approach and a commercial approach?
Well, that's a very good question, and there are tensions, even within every healthcare system that also has a scientific body associated with it, like a school of medicine that's part of an academic medical center, like my institution, and like many institutions. Science must be much more methodical. It's a slower approach, because you have to dot all of the T's. You have to cross all of the T's and dot all of the I's. You have to record. There are, of course, regulations, making sure that you don't do anything dangerous. You can't just decide you're going to do things to people without telling them, or proceed in unethical, harmful ways, which is business should not either, of course. Science moves at its own pace. And to do a thorough job based on the evidence, the best evidence you can find for every aspect of your project, it takes time. And business operations reacts much faster, because the goals are different. You generally speaking are, you're taking a product to market, you want to sell it, you need to understand the market. Markets move fast, and individuals can make more of the decisions. Now, the fault accrues to them. Whoever made the decision, if the business failed, the fault is with them. But unless it's a very dodgy business, lives are not at stake, or shouldn't be. I mean, we can certainly all come up with many examples of when a faulty product harmed people, and that's unethical business. But if the product is not going to harm someone, then if you rush to market, make the best decisions you can that are fast, and you get the product on the market and you focus on sales and do everything you can to sell it, and your business fails, okay, you're out money. Maybe you're out of a job. Worst case scenario, maybe your company owes a lot of money, in which case you claim bankruptcy and the courts clear it up and you start over again. In healthcare and in science, it's about human lives, and so we have to be very careful because we have to mitigate risks that as a value in society are much more dear to us than money or product or success commercially.
That's so very well said, Catherine. And now they go the next 10 minutes. I will give a very quick summary of what doctora Caterina Craven habló exactamente del impacto de ciencia y el método de ciencia y cómo este método debe obviamente cumplir con algunos elementos básicos que tiene que considerar la diferencia de las personas, la diferencia de las viviendas, de dónde los determinantes sociales, las limitaciones, pero la clave que ella habla es hacer la pregunta correcta. Si tú haces la pregunta correcta, científicamente el método te va a llevar a la respuesta correcta. Todo tiene un riesgo. Tiene que considerar las personas, las familias y la población que necesita este método impactar. Ahora, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre hacer ciencia y negocio comercial? Tiene diferentes metas y diferentes impactos. Y con eso ella nos quiso decir de que el mercado, tú puedes seguir productos y obviamente hay una ética, pero tu negocio puede ir en bancarrota, pero sobrevida. En ciencia, con vidas humanas, no. Tú puedes matar a las personas si no tienes un método científico adecuado. Thank you, darling. Therefore, look, I'm so excited. I feel like a real presenter of television here.
Well, you look like one too.
The bilingual thing here is happening, And but now then, basically, you've been so kind to tell us about science, and I want to, since CITLA, the center is actually recording this interaction. I don't want to miss the part you said about the science of living, about human life. And I just want to tell you that my friendship with you has been everything to me, everything. Because when you get accepted, as you very well say, with very different realities, but the science brings us together. Do you remember when we met the first time? Can you tell the audience?
Absolutely, I do. We met in the student working group of the American Medical Informatics Association annual symposium, their biggest annual conference. And of course, as students, we were older students, as most of the students are, because most of the people that go into informatics, certainly then, but even to a degree now, already have their first degree or two at university. They have professional experience. And so we really think of it more as trainees, graduate students, postdoctoral students. And so Carol and I met in the student working group. And I remember sitting down, and at the time you had long curly hair, and you had a beaming smile. And I remember we were sitting in a circle and talking and, planning and plotting and having big visions and few doubts, as is wonderful in younger people who are newer to their profession and want to change the world. And I remember looking across from you, and you had the most mirthful, mischievous smile. And at the same time, I knew you were a serious thinker. I could tell, and the comments that you made were intelligent and purposeful. And I thought, that's one of my kind.
And since then, obviously, we have traveled the world and we have changed the world. And in my case, it's the value of science, of caring, of living the principle of science. It means then to be consistent, to be systematic, and to be transparent. In that sense, do you remember how many countries have we visited together?
Well, we've been in Mexico, we've been in Chile, we've been in the United States, in Missouri and Maryland and Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C., Chicago and San Francisco. And we've been in Geneva in Switzerland together. We've been in Maastricht, the Netherlands together. We've been in Australia, in Melbourne and Brisbane and some of the smaller communities around those areas. And adventures to be had together.
That's right. And one point you have really mentioned, but I think you've been very humble, it's about the girls, the women involved in science. Why it is so important that we get involved in a very hard science, and especially for policy making? What do you think our role is so important on that?
Well, women make up 50%, actually slightly more than 50% of the world's population. We are not a minority. We're half the human race. And our experiences, our perspectives, our minds, our emotions, our thoughts, our creativity, our brilliance, our differences from men, we also are the creators, the mothers of the world. And if this doesn't matter, if this needs explaining, why this is important to be represented in society, why our voices matter, it's a bit mind-boggling to think that they wouldn't. Why would the assumption be that? In the short term, and by short term in scientific thinking, it means hundreds of years, perhaps 1,000 or two. But the wonderful thing about human beings is we have the capacity to change. We change our societies, and we're in the process globally right now, and have been for some time. It's not just today or during the COVID crisis, or during the rising realization of very bad sexual harassing behaviors of the Me Too movement, at least in the United States over the last few years. It's been many decades, and really a couple hundred years, a few hundred years of a slow change, but really fast in terms of the scope of time. And science always works in the scope of time, where we realize we need balance. We need more of a balance, and good things come of it for all of us. When we have more of a balance with voices, thoughts, representation, in every level, in science, in the public life, in politics, in policy, in action for society, what happens is we harness the brilliance of half of the human race. And I don't think that the human race can afford not to. Do you?
No, not at all. Can Catherine, just my person who going to translate this conversation just coming on the way. Therefore, he give us 5 minutes break.
Please.
That way he can come on. Therefore, we'll take 5 minutes break.
Absolutely.
And it's fantastic because then I cannot do the both things. I feel like an actress. We ready?
But there was still the responsibility when it was news, it was clear that it was news. Reporting, fact-based reporting. There was a very clear line between fact-based reporting that was responsible and had a method, and then opinions, which was editorializing. And then as we've moved into the future with social media, that line has been completely erased, and it's very hard for a lot of people to think critically and sort out what is the difference between fact and evidence-based information and opinion, informed or otherwise, and propaganda, which is purposely meant to fool people. And so because social media, particularly Facebook and also Twitter, are so powerful for rapidly spreading information, and they've been used wrongly in an extension of the way our news broadcasts have become misused. That's why Congress and the American people are, very upset and calling to accountability, transparency and accountability, and the expectation that with such great power comes much bigger responsibility than the owners, the founders of these commercial entities were, at least in the past, willing to take. There are checks and balances, and right now we're coming to a point where there needs to be some reining in and responsibility.
That's wonderful you explain, because from far away is with a lot of respect aside, from far away of Australia, Oceania, and Latin America, I see it as a self-destruction, because thank you. I'm sorry. We're talking, you see, with Catherine, I can talk hours and hours. I remember so well. Welcome back. And also my translator, I think I need to take notes again, Catherine. I do apologize, but the people from Chile, I invite them to learn English. That way we can really talk science. And you know what you said about critical thinking, it really encouraged me to. Catherine, do you remember when you first met me, how passionate about in public? And I was a little bit anxious, I think, but do you see any development in the critical thinking, especially as a friend? What helped us to do the PhD for critical thinking, you reckon?
Oh my heavens. This is something that the two of us are proof in the pudding. When we met, we were in our 30s. We were not children. We had life experience. We were adults. We were capable of making good decisions and some bad ones. But exactly. But we were mature. And yet at the same time, when you embark upon, when you take the decision to become a scientist, of whatever focus of type of science you are, because there isn't one area of science, there are many areas of scientific endeavor. It's a commitment to continual learning, and you never stop learning, and science never stops learning. And if you continue to apply yourself, you can't know everything. You will never know everything, but you're always growing. You're always thinking. You're always learning. You're always checking your own thinking. Where is the bias coming in? How can I strengthen this by looking for additional evidence or frameworks to help guide my thinking? Is there a theory that it can inform part of what I'm trying to do that I'm unaware of? How can I be multidisciplinary and bring in other experts to help guide the project? Because very quickly in science, you realize that your brain is not big enough to know everything, and you're not big enough to do it all. And so it's impossible to embark upon a scientific career and not grow. And at the same time, I want to encourage, for any adults out there who feel like, oh, it's too late for me, or I already have many responsibilities. Not at all. Not at all. The difference between your level of maturity in thinking and your ability to process facts and your ability to sift and weigh evidence, your ability to do lots of sophisticated synthesis of evidence, bringing teams together with various types of expertise and helping them meld to tackle problems, to solve problems systematically. This is night and day in the not quite 16 years since I met you. And one of the things about a PhD program, a master's program to start with, but then a PhD program, is it forces you to get systematic and learn how to be a systematic thinker. It's not about memorizing facts, although of course you will certainly accumulate many of those during your deepening of expertise in an area, but it really forces you to develop the brain and to develop those critical thinking skills so that you can continue to learn for the rest of your life. And, if you think that Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's the head of Allergy and Infectious Disease Institute for NIH, National Institutes of Health, our number one expert on infectious disease and our number one expert in this pandemic, who is also is one of the world's leading and foremost experts in HIV/AIDS, he's 79. He's still working 80 hours a week because he loves to learn, and he's still learning. And he makes it very clear that he's not the same scientist that he was 10 years ago. He's a better scientist. And so it's not about being done, it's about the journey. And it's about this systematic journey of learning how to do that kind of thinking. And then being open. Don't let your ego get in the way or get anxious about not knowing things. We're all anxious. We all get anxious about what we don't know. But you have to settle down and realize that you can develop expertise. And, the two of us, I remember, everybody, I want to tell you that Carola used to be, she liked interacting with people. She really did like talking and interacting with people, but she was not comfortable really speaking publicly. And she was very unsure of writing and her writing, very much so. And I encouraged her. She was working on her dissertation and worried, of course, because everyone worries while they're working on their dissertation, their doctoral thesis, in other words. And I, at the time, was editing a very small newsletter for the student working group for the American Medical Informatics Association that we were both members of. And so I was constantly asking the various graduate students and medical residents and fellows and postdoctoral trainees for small articles and content about informatics and their own projects that they were working on for this newsletter. And Carola was quite hesitant, but she wanted to help out. She liked me and she wanted to be part of things, a participant, someone that contributes. And she wrote something and she was very anxious about giving it to me. And I read it and I said, darling, you're a wonderful writer. What are you talking about? And you're not even writing in your native language, Spanish. You're writing in English. I'm like, I was like, you should never, ever be, I said, at this juncture, I was finishing a master's degree in journalism, and I was an English undergraduate, and I had been writing scientifically myself for quite some time, and I had done a lot of editing, and I had actually taught freshman composition many years ago for undergraduates at university. And I said, you have nothing to be afraid of. Just keep going, keep learning. It's not about grammar that can be corrected. It's not about the perfect punctuation. It's about being able to think logically and get the logical thoughts down on paper logically. And you do that. And practice makes perfect. Every time we do a scientific publication or a professional presentation, we still have to stop. You have to stop and get your thinking in order and slow down and think, what is the logical progression of ideas? And I've seen you come so far, so very far, and we were not children when we met. And so it is absolutely possible for anybody listening here to undertake any endeavor you want in a more systematic fashion. Just don't let your ego get in the way. Believe in yourself. Of course you can do it. It just takes some effort, and it takes learning how to really tackle it systematically and learn how to gather the evidence. But night and day, we're very different people than when we met.
Of course, and I firstly remember very well then when I actually understood the never stop learning, always checking your own thinking. It's a very profound lifestyle as a scientist because it gives you the humble reality that you can provide solution that can change people's life. And that's basically about health science. And obviously, with data, we can do many things. Therefore, how can you translate this world we live, very human, very emotional, because Latin American people, we are very emotional and very passionate about things. However, scientists over the years, especially 2020, we talk about big data, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about big technologies. But from your point of view as a scientist, as you many times you say, we have to have the right methods, the right questions, the right elements. What would you say for women's, and very good example you use for Dr. Fuchi? 79 years old. I mean, we are very young still, and he's been very, very strong. What do you act? I'm thinking about my colleagues at the moment, director of services. What would you say to them when the politicians and the commercial people want to use science for their benefit without thinking? What is our position? And that you mentioned before, how we handle the truth.
There's always a tension between wanting to make money wanting to personally benefit, and then what is best for the most people. And that's the difference between business leadership and governing and being a leader of people in society. And that's why it's not the same exact thing. Both are needed, both are beneficial. But when you are in a service position, a policy position, an academic position, a teaching position, you have to make sure that you have the separation of any other interests from really truly looking at what is best for the most people. What is your mission? The mission is not the same exact thing as it is when you're running a business. That's not to demonize business, but you're not about profit, and you're not about profit for a small number of people. You're about benefit for the most people that you can provide it to. And one would hope that you're about a certain level of benefit for everybody, no matter who they are. It's not a perfect world, it's not ideal, so you may not be able to give all of the types of benefits you want to every person, but you can give some to everybody or almost everybody. And so it's a very different type of thinking, and that's not about idealism, it's about leadership. And so you have to take a look at, well, what are the facts? And systematically, what kind of benefit can I provide? Given what sorts of resources? And you have to weigh and make decisions. You're not God. You can't do everything for everybody. But you do have to look at resources, and you do have to look at the evidence that's telling you, not just your own personal preference, but the evidence, the data that tells you what sort of benefit can I purchase with the money and the time and the people power that I have that's going to benefit the most people when you are in a services or government position, an academic position, a teaching position. And that's not your focus when you are having a business. That's not your focus. Your business is to accrue as much success in terms of taking your product to the market for yourself and whoever your shareholders are. Now, when there is ethical business, you are also taking into account the benefit for your employees, and you are making sure that they profit with money, with salaries, with good benefits, with good vacation time. You're taking care of them. They are in some ways co-owners, even if that's not officially what they are. And if you are also an ethical business person, you're trying not to bring a harmful product to the market, and you're trying to bring a product that will help people's lives, make people's lives easier, that perhaps will bring some joy and fun. These are all positive things, but it's a choice. They don't have to buy your product. Whereas when you are leading in service positions, when you're in government, when you're in teaching, when you're in healthcare, you have an obligation to help the most people you can, based on evidence, so that you can allocate your resources. And that's the fundamental difference.
That's fantastic. That's fine. And Catherine,
ethics are in both. Ethics need to be in both, because otherwise unscrupulous behavior happens. And is that really who we want to be?
Correct. And remember very much, when you finish your PhD, you provide evidence, especially with COVID-19, and make very clear the importance of involving rural healthcare services.
Yes.
And outside city services, because in Chile and obviously in Australia as well, the primary care service become very significant, but the budget doesn't go to them. Why it is so important? You did provide a lot of, I remember enjoying your findings. In post-pandemic, what is the future of involving the regions and the people from far away in order not to collapse the system? How we can improve that?
You know, one of the things that in the United States we've learned a tremendous amount, that in some ways Chile was already, at least in some respects, better positioned. In the pandemic, we've learned much more very rapidly how to use telemedicine and video visits via phone for primary care. Because in the past, we limited it to generally more specialty care, and the kinds of specialty care where an examination could take place without touching or drawing blood. in this case, and in part, we were not able to expand that more to primary care because of the way our reimbursement was through Centers for Medicaid and Medicare for a large portion of our population. And our private insurers that insure the rest of, well, most of the rest of the population, tend to follow what the government reimbursement follows. And because the government wouldn't reimburse for telemedicine for primary care, the private insurers would not. So we were stuck in a chicken and an egg situation, as we say, which comes first. We couldn't get there. Because of the danger of COVID, very rapidly our healthcare systems shifted and are much more able to, and to some extent, everyone is, we're not done with COVID. We're still in the middle of COVID. And so we're still doing much more telemedicine for primary care for every type of specialty, and then limiting the contact for when patients must go somewhere to have blood drawn, to have a test done, to have, imaging done. But we're taking care of the office visits, the visual examination, the gathering of data, that kind of thing. We're doing that almost, not solely, but very much so via telemedicine. And that is something that, Chile was already doing quite a lot of data gathering for cardiology even 10 years ago around the country to tackle heart disease with telehealth monitoring for cardiology and with telemedicine. And building up infrastructure for telemedicine in rural healthcare, and also leveraging video technology for those phones. Now, phones aren't free. And each country is different in terms of the data plans they have and how easily and the kinds of receptions, the cell phone networks in rural places. But the fact of the matter is that is absolutely one area of investment, of infrastructure investment, and work emphasis, policy emphasis, where other countries. If it's sort of like other countries were ahead of us, then because of our crisis, we raced ahead, and now other countries can pivot and do more for more specialties than they have been. And that's one area certainly that Chile can explore.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that, Catherine. And one thing before we finish the time, before they cut us off in 5 minutes, and how you've seen in the last few years the evolution of science from far away where you are located. Before, we used to have a lot of access to PubMed, and a lot of things happen, quite a lot of things in the National Library of Medicine. But for some reason, the last years, I've seen a different approach. What would you see from a scientific point of view? I haven't been able to point it out because I don't live there. When I used to live in Virginia, I could actually see a lot of vibrant projects, and I was maybe in another stage of science in North America. But what would you say that happened for the last couple of years for scientific world-class project? Because now your country actually doesn't engage with the World Health Organization. Therefore, what happened there?
Well, we have a political situation that many Americans disagree with, where there are certain very powerful political people, without getting into a deep political discussion, and very briefly, that don't believe and are doing their best to dismantle certain shared public goods that have traditionally been part of our government agencies. Now, this is not to say that privatization of certain functions or privatization, private business is bad. It's not. But a large country, or even a moderately sized country, there have to be certain shared public goods that you can only do big projects like big national, big national interstate highways. Big, NASA, our moonshot, our space program. We could not have done that at a state level, and a national disease surveillance, through the Centers for Disease Control. That's incredibly important, and that's been defunded to a great degree, and it's been politically hamstrung during this crisis. And the extension of that was the participation in WHO. And so please do believe me that 2/3 or more, really more like close to 70% of the American population disagrees, regardless of their political affiliation, with the decision to pull out of WHO. So as well as a lot of a very similar number of people disagree completely with the idea that we're going to dismantle our public health infrastructure internally in CDC, Centers for Disease Control,
Correct.
during at all, much less during a pandemic. So we're undergoing a lot of change right now and a lot of
But,
political upheaval.
but as a scientist,
Mhm.
because it always going to have this political arena,
Oh,
these paradigms, and these, I just learned recently, no, because of one of my students doing a research study, and it make a lot of sense from Newton and Albert Einstein, and then Hawkins with the formula, the equation of energy. Last century, when science went to the wrong hands, it became a first and second world war. And now with cybersecurity, we're coming through this global chaos, which is actually we all responsible, not only the scientists. But how do you recommend as a scientist to avoid this political arena, which is very unstable at the moment? What is our position? I got my opinion. I can give you
sure,
after.
sure. Absolutely. Well, I think that we've already had many demonstration projects of science on a grand scale. If you want to build science on a grand scale, you have to cooperate. You have to bring those many minds together. It's
Bingo.
not one person, it's not one pocket of scientists, it's not a particular group of people with certain political beliefs. It's bringing the best minds together to do the biggest projects. And these things of their nature must be large. They're at a regional, a state level. They're at a regional level. They're at a national level. They're at an international level. And so even if we have particular beliefs that there should be lots of successful private business, the fact of the matter is we already have the evidence that we cannot do these things. All of the things we've done in the best fashion scientifically have been through shared public goods, supported as countries. And so we don't do everything that way, but we pick and choose certain things that we do that way. And our best, biggest scientific discoveries and innovations and projects have come out of that kind of collaboration. And so we already have the evidence, we already have the proof. And if we want to bring our data together to solve pandemics, if we want to bring our data together to do big data work and artificial intelligence, we have to cooperate in a big scale. There is room for industry, there is room for private business, but we have to do big things together for shared public goods. And that's we've already proven it. We've already shown it to ourselves. History's shown it.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. And with that sense, I will actually finish saying something in Spanish. And also, I hope you like this interaction with us. Just to complement your answer, definitely, I think the journey of the global transformation for quality of life, as you well know, I've been reading this book that I meant to send you there. Is our first Prime Minister of Australia, and she actually wrote with Hillary Clinton, Jacinta, Michelle Bachelet,
Oh,
and she
fantastic.
actually, that's why I have this urgent necessity to talk to you, because for me, in my head, you are the first American president for me. Okay? And I'm the future
I'm
Chilean president. Therefore, we're talking women to women, friends to friend. And your last message, which I will prove it as evidence, because this is our digital identity. This will be typed, and it will be actually put in Spanish. Nicolas
very
will
good.
put in Spanish the subtitles during the week, but he's telling everyone to learn English. That way they don't miss the evidence available in English, to don't make the same mistake in developing countries. I want to declare our journey has been so open, Catherine, that we know we're doing this for public good. That's why we scientists, we're not making business based on abusing people. We're making business for everyone. That way they have the right tools. Because the collaboration is global. And the collaboration is global not based in political thinking only, but also with the value of existing as a human race. And that's why I'm very proud of you. And always you are an inspiration for me to get up every morning because you know my history, you know my evidence of sacrifices, and you always accept me who I am. Therefore, I will give this summary in Spanish and we'll say goodbye in a minute. Um, querida audiencia, le queremos decir que doctora Catherine Craven habla un poquito español, pero también es más rápido que usted aprenda inglés. Vamos a hacer un resumen de la entrevista, la vamos a subir en una versión subtitulada durante la semana en español para que usted tenga la capacidad de entender lo que doctora Catherine Craven nos compartió desde New York, Estados Unidos, y lo invitamos fuertemente a que estudie inglés. Vamos a poner algunos links para que tome cursos de inglés gratis porque es importante colaborar globalmente. As the last message, what would you say to the future generations, Catherine? What is your message for Matilda?
My message for Matilda and for all of the other young people out there is, don't lose hope, don't despair. Much smarter minds than mine have said, yours is not to solve every problem in the world. You don't need to carry that burden on your shoulders, but you have to get in and do what you can. So pick an area that you can develop passion for, and learn as much as you can about it and figure out the questions you want to ask and the problems you want to solve, and then learn how to do those things. And find your people, find your tribe, find your extended group of experts and colleagues that you want to work with, because you're never alone, and you should never try to take this journey by yourself. You're always with others. And so go forth and do good things, and don't worry too much. Get out there and you'll be successful if you're not focusing on success. You're focusing on what makes you happy, and the problems that need to be solved, and making good friends along the way, like I've made with you, Carola. That's what I would share.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and I wish you all the best. Therefore, anytime you want, you take us offline if you want, Nicolas. That way we can talk and say goodbye to Catherine. And thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Catherine. I really enjoyed the conversation, and obviously, is everything going to be typed, and you can share that link afterwards. It's all going to be in Sitla website and with Facebook, and obviously we will share with our networks. Therefore,